£5,000, and for that price, her father said, the grieving Duke of Ashbourne might take her. Marianne Hale heard the figure spoken aloud in the Duke's own library, and she felt it settle on her shoulders the way a wet cloak settles, heavy and cold even in July. The room smelled of beeswax and old paper, and something underneath it all that she could not name. The close, shut smell of a house that had stopped opening its windows. Sunlight came through the tall panes in long gold bars, and dust turned slowly in them, and her father stood in the middle of one of those bars with his hat crushed in both hands. 5,000, mister, Hale said again, as if the number might soften with repeating. It would clear everything, your grace. Every note, every man I owe. The Duke did not answer at once. He stood at the far end of the room with his back to them, one hand flat upon the mantelshelf, looking down into a hearth that held no fire, because it was high summer and the day was warm. He was younger than Marianne had expected, 8 and 20, perhaps, no more. The black of his coat was severe across shoulders that were broad enough to fill the doorway she had been led through, and his dark hair wanted cutting, and there was a stillness in him that frightened her more than shouting would have. Men who shouted, she understood. This was a man who had folded something away inside himself and locked the drawer. You understand what you are offering me, the Duke said. He did not turn round. My daughter's hand, your grace. A marriage. Quiet, if you wish it. As quiet as you like. I did not ask for a wife. His voice was low and even, scraped smooth by use. I asked for nothing. You came to me. Marianne's fingers tightened on the worn ribbon of her reticule. The garden beyond the windows was blazing, roses gone full and heavy, a blackbird singing somewhere in the limes, and the brightness of it seemed an insult, that the world could be so green while she was being weighed out like sugar on a grocer's scale. I came, her father said, and his voice cracked, because there is nowhere else to come. The Duke turned then, and Marianne, who had promised herself she would not look at him, looked. His face was not what grief had led her to imagine. There were no hollows, no ruin. He was, in the plain hard fact of it, beautiful. A straight nose, a hard clean jaw, a mouth that had perhaps once known how to laugh. But his eyes were the grey of slate after rain, and they passed over her father and came to rest on her with no more warmth than a man might spare a chair. Does she speak? He asked. Or is she sold mute? The word went through her like a needle. Sold. He had said the thing aloud that everyone in the room had been dressing in softer cloth. I speak, your grace, Marianne said. He had not expected it. She saw the small check in him, the way one sees a horse hesitate at a gate. Then speak, he said. Tell me you consent to this. I will not have it said afterward that a girl was carried to my altar weeping. I am 26, Marianne said. I am not a girl, and I do not weep where it can be of use to anyone. Her father made a small wounded sound, but the Duke's grey eyes had sharpened, very slightly, the way light sharpens on the edge of a blade. 26, he repeated, and unwed. There is no fortune to recommend me, and now there is a debt to disrecommend me. The arithmetic is not difficult, your grace. You need not be delicate about it. A silence. Outside, the black bird sang on. The Duke crossed to the great desk that stood between the windows, and Marianne watched his hand, a wide, strong hand, move a sheaf of papers a half-inch to the left, square them, as though the room could not be borne unless its edges were true. My man of business drew the settlement this morning, he said. Your father's debts assumed by my estate. A jointure for you, should you outlive me. A house in Bath, which you will not have cause to use, since you will live here. He looked up. It is generous, more generous than your situation. I know what my situation is worth, she said. Do you? It was not a question. He set down the pen he had taken up. Then know this also, Miss Hale, and we will not speak of it again. I am offering you my name and my protection and the run of this house. I am not offering you the things a young woman dreams of. There will be no courtship. There will be no... A pause. The smallest crack in the smooth, scraped voice. Affection. The part of me that might have given you that is not here any longer. It is in the ground at Ashbourne Church, beside the woman it belonged to. Do you understand me? The garden blazed. The dust turned in the gold. I understand you perfectly, Your Grace, Marianne said. You are not the first man to tell me he has nothing to give. You are merely the first to be honest about it, and for 1/2 of 1 second, so brief she would later wonder if she had invented it to comfort herself, something moved behind the slate-grey eyes, like a fish turning in deep water, there and then gone. Sign, he said to her father, before either of us thinks better of it. The wedding was 3 days later, by special license, in a stone church so small and so empty that her own footsteps came back to her from the cold walls. There were 4 people present: herself, the Duke, the curate, and a housekeeper in grey bombazine, who stood at the back with her hands folded and watched the whole of it with an expression Marianne could not read. It was over in 11 minutes. Marianne counted them, because counting was a thing she could do, and there was so very little else she had been given to do. The curate spoke the words. The Duke spoke his responses in a flat, clear voice that carried to every corner. When the moment came for the ring, he took her hand without looking at it, and his fingers were warm. That surprised her, that the hand of so cold a man should be warm, and he slid a band of old gold onto her finger that fit so loosely it might have been made for a larger woman. It had been. She understood at once. It had been made for someone else. She closed her fist around it so it would not fall. You may kiss, the curate began, and the Duke was already turning away. That will not be necessary, he said, and walked down the short aisle and out into the white summer light. And Marianne stood at the altar in a borrowed veil and watched her husband leave her before the ink on the register was dry. The housekeeper came up the aisle. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with a square, plain face and shrewd dark eyes, and she looked Marianne over from veil to hem with the frank assessment of a farmer at a stock fair. Mrs. Pruitt, Your Grace, she said. I keep his house. A beat. You'll forgive him the kiss. He's out of practice at being married. The last one took a deal of practice too, when she first come, and look how that. Mrs. Pruitt stopped herself and pressed her lips together, and the something that had been about to be said folded itself away. Well, the carriage is at the gate. You'll want your dinner. Will he be at dinner? Marianne asked. Mrs. Pruitt's dark eyes flickered. His Grace dines alone, Your Grace. He has done this 12-month. I shouldn't make a study of it, if I were you. It only wears the eyes out, watching a door that don't open. Ashbourne House sat in a fold of the Wiltshire Downs like a great grey beast lying down to sleep, and like a sleeping beast, it gave the impression that waking it would be unwise. The carriage came up a mile of avenue under limes heavy with summer, and the gravel of the sweep crunched under the wheels, and when Marianne stepped down into the warm evening the air smelled of cut grass and box hedge, and faintly of the dust the horses had raised. Inside, it was cold. Not in temperature. The July heat lay even here, thick in the high marble hall. It was cold in some other way, the way a room is cold when no one has laughed in it for a long while. Holland covers lay over half the furniture like snow that had forgotten to melt. The long windows were shuttered at their lower halves, so that the light came in only at the top, grey and high and church-like. On a console table stood a great vase that held no flowers. Only the brown brittle stems of flowers that had been cut a year ago and never thrown away. He won't have them moved, Mrs. Pruitt said, following her glance. Nor anything else. The house is kept just as it was, to the inch. She said it without inflection, but Marianne heard, underneath, a long weariness. The weariness of a woman who had spent 12 months dusting a shrine. A girl of perhaps 4 years old was sitting on the bottom step of the great staircase. Marianne had not been told about a child. The little girl had her father's dark hair and a face like a small grave moon, and she was holding a wooden horse in her lap, turning it over and over in her hands. She looked up when they came in, and her eyes, grey, the Duke's slate grey, set in that small, solemn face, went straight to Marianne and fixed there with the unblinking directness of the very young. Are you my mamma now? The child asked. The hall went very still. Mrs. Pruitt drew a sharp breath. Somewhere far off in the house a clock was ticking, and the warm evening light came grey and high through the shuttered windows, and Marianne felt the whole enormous cold house turn upon the hinge of that one small question. "This is Lady Sophia," Mrs. Pruitt said, too quickly. "Sophie, you was to stay in the nursery, no?" Marianne said. She crossed the marble, her footsteps coming back at her from the walls, and she knelt down on the cold stone in her travelling dress, so that her eyes were level with the child's, and she looked at that small, solemn moon of a face, and she did not lie, because she had learned a long time ago that children always know. "I am not your mamma," she said gently. "No one will ever be your mamma instead of the one you had. That place is hers, and it will always be hers." The child's chin trembled. "But I have come to live in your house, and I have never in my life had anyone to share a horse with, and I see that you have a very fine one, and I think we are going to be great friends, you and I, if it suits you." The little girl considered this with enormous seriousness. Then she held out the wooden horse, balanced on both small palms, an offering. "His name is Captain," she said. "His leg is broken, but you can't see it if you stand him this way." "Then we shall always stand him that way," Marianne said, and took the horse, and felt the smooth worn wood of it, warm from the child's hands, and felt something in her own chest crack quietly down the middle. She did not see the Duke, but she heard him, a single footstep on the gallery above, where the shadows were deep, the scrape of a boot on board going suddenly still. When she looked up, there was no one there, only the empty gallery, and the high grey light, and the cold. Mrs. Pruitt was watching her with an expression that had changed. The frank stock fare assessment was gone, and in its place was something more careful, and more troubled, and almost like pity. "You didn't ought to have done that," the housekeeper said, very low, so the child would not hear. "Knelt down to a frightened little girl? Why ever not?" "Because," said Mrs. Pruitt, and stopped, and folded the rest of it away as she had folded the other thing at the altar. "Come, your room is the blue room, not the Duchess's apartments." He was very particular. The blue room. They had given her dinner on a tray, and she had eaten it alone in the blue room at a little table by the window, watching the long summer dusk come down gold, and then rose and then grey over the downs, and listening to the unfamiliar house tick and settle around her. At 9 the maid came to take the tray, and to ask, with lowered eyes, whether her Grace required anything further, and her Grace did not, and the door closed, and Marianne was alone with the wedding ring that did not fit, and the wooden horse with the broken leg that the child had insisted she keep for the night. She could not sleep. It was not the strangeness of the bed, though it was strange. It was the house. It pressed in on her. All those shrouded rooms, all those withered flowers no one would throw away, all that grief kept like a museum behind glass. And somewhere in it was a man who had stood up in church and married her and walked out without a kiss, and a child who had asked a stranger to be her mother because she had no one left to ask. A little before midnight Marianne rose and put on her wrapper and took a candle and went out into the dark gallery, not to pry, she told herself, only because the blue room had grown too small to hold her thoughts. The house at night was vast and breathing. Her candle threw a wavering circle of gold that the dark drank greedily at its edges. She went along the gallery past the shrouded shapes of furniture, past portraits whose painted eyes the candlelight woke and then released, and she had nearly turned back when she saw it, a thread of light beneath the door at the far end of the passage. And from beyond the door, very faint, the sound of a pianoforte. It was being played badly. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the playing of a musician, but the playing of someone who had once learned and long since stopped, picking out a melody one uncertain note at a time, stopping, beginning again. A simple tune. A lullaby, she thought. The kind of thing one plays to a child. She should have gone back. She knew she should have gone back. Instead, she crossed the gallery on bare, silent feet and stood outside the door, and through the inch of gap where it had not quite caught she saw him. The Duke of Ashbourne sat at the instrument, with his coat off, and his shirt open at the throat, and his head was bent, and his wide, warm hands moved over the keys with the painful slowness of a man relearning a language he had sworn never to speak again. On the music stand before him, there was no music. There was a small framed likeness, a miniature, the kind painted on ivory and set in gold, propped where the sheets should be. And as Marianne watched, he came to the end of the little tune, and his hands stopped, and he sat for a long moment with his fingers resting on the silent keys and his shoulders quite still. Then he reached out and turned the little portrait face down upon the stand, the way a man closes a door he cannot bear to leave open, and he pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes. Marianne stepped back from the door. Her heart was going hard. She had been given a husband of stone, and she had believed in the stone, because it was easier, and here, in the small hours, behind a door he thought no one would ever open, the stone had a fissure straight through its heart, and through it she had seen all the way down. She turned to go, and the loose board beneath her bare foot let out a long, slow, betraying groan. The pianoforte stopped. "Who is there?" The Duke's voice came through the door, no longer scraped smooth, but raw, stripped to the wood. "Mrs. Pruitt?" "I gave orders this passage was not to be." The door came open, and the Duke of Ashbourne stood on the threshold in his shirt-sleeves, with the candlelight on his face and his grey eyes wide and wet and furious, looking down at his wife of one day, who had seen the thing he had buried so carefully that he had almost convinced himself it was gone. For a moment, neither of them moved. The whole sleeping house held its breath around them. "You," he said at last, very quietly, and there was something terrible in the quiet. "You were not to come here." "I know," Marianne said. "I lost my way." "You are lying." "Yes," she said. "I am. I heard the music." His jaw worked. His hand on the doorframe had gone white at the knuckle. "What you saw," he began, "you will forget. Do you understand me? You will forget you ever." "I will not tell anyone," Marianne said. "But I will not forget. I am not able to forget true things. It is a great failing in me. My father has remarked on it for years." She drew a breath. Behind him, on the stand, the small portrait lay face down in the candlelight, and she did not look at it, and the not looking cost her something. "You told me there was nothing left of the man who might have felt anything. You were wrong, Your Grace. You only put him somewhere dark and stopped feeding him. That is not the same as nothing." "I should know. I have done it myself." The Duke stared at her. In all his cold, careful house, in all his year of shrouds and withered flowers and doors that did not open, she did not think anyone had said a true thing to his face in a very long time, and she watched it land in him like a stone drop down a well, the long fall, and then, far below, the splash. "Go to bed, Miss Hale," he said. But his voice had changed. The smoothness was gone, and it did not come back, and he had called her by her maiden name, as though the wedding had not happened, as though for one moment they were only two strangers caught in a dark passage, with the truth standing naked between them. "It is Ashbourne now," she said softly. "Your Grace, you married me this morning. You may regret it as much as you like. I think I shall regret it a great deal myself before we are done, but you cannot make it not have happened by calling me by the wrong name." And she turned, and took up her candle, and walked back down the long, dark gallery to the blue room, with her spine very straight, and her heart going like a hammer, and she did not look back, though every step of the way she felt his eyes on her, and behind her, faint and uncertain, she heard the pianoforte begin, very slowly, to play again. Morning came to the blue room thin and gold, sliding in low under the half-shutters, and laying a long bar of light across the counterpane, and for one suspended moment, before she remembered, Marianne lay and listened to a blackbird and a wood-pigeon arguing in the limes, and thought herself still at home. Then her hand moved on the strange linen and found the ring that did not fit, and the whole of it came back, the church, the 11 minutes, the face-down portrait, the pianoforte starting again behind her in the dark. She rose and washed in water that had gone cool overnight, and dressed herself before the maid could come, because being dressed was a kind of armor and she meant to wear it. The wooden horse with the broken leg stood on the sill where she had set it, facing the garden, its painted eye catching the sun. "Captain," the child had called him. You can't see it if you stand him this way. There was no one to tell her what a duchess did with her mornings. So Marianne went and found the only person in the house who seemed to want her. Sophia was in the nursery at the top of the east stair, kneeling on a window seat with her nose flattened to the warm glass, and she did not turn round when the door opened, only said, in the grave, careful voice of the very young, "There is a man cutting the grass. He goes back and forth. I have counted him to 40. 40 is a great many," Marianne said, and came and knelt beside her on the cushion, and looked down. Below them the long lawn ran away green and shorn to a haze of roses, and a gardener walked his scythe through the last rough strip of it, and the cut grass lay in pale ribbons that smelled, even up here through the open casement, of summer and water and the green broken hearts of stems. "Mrs. Pruitt says I am not to open the window above one hand," Sophia said, "because of falling. I should not fall, but I do not say so, because then she worries, and her face goes like this." The child pulled a small fierce frown, and Marianne, surprised, laughed. The first laugh the house had heard out of her, and it sounded strange and bright off the nursery walls. Sophia turned and studied her with the slate-grey eyes. "You laughed," she observed. "I did. Was it aloud?" "I don't know," the child said honestly. "No one does it. Papa doesn't." She turned the matter over. "He used to. There is a noise he made. I can almost remember it." She looked back at the window, at the man and the scythe and the ribbons of grass, and her small hand tightened on the sill. "I should like to go out. I am not let out very much. Mama liked the roses, and now no one goes." The blackbird sang. Somewhere below a door closed with the soft, heavy sound of a great house swallowing a sound. Marianne looked at the child's hand on the warm, white-painted wood, and made a decision she knew she had no business making, on her first full day, in a house that was kept to the inch. "Then we shall go out," she said. "You and I and Captain. We shall go and look at the roses, and if anyone asks, you may tell them it was entirely my fault, because I am new, and do not know the rules, and cannot be expected to." The rose garden lay on the south front, walled in old brick that held the heat like a loaf fresh from the oven, and the smell of it stopped Marianne in the gateway, a thick warm wave of damask and musk and box, with the dry mineral scent of sun-baked stone underneath. The roses had not been pruned in a year. They had gone enormous and shaggy and magnificent, climbing the walls in tangled arms, dropping blown petals on the gravel paths in drifts of cream and crimson, and bees moved through them in a low contented thunder. Sophia stood very still, just inside the gate, holding Marianne's hand with a grip gone suddenly tight, looking at the place as though it were a room full of people she had been told not to disturb. "It is grown wild," Marianne said gently. "Things do, when they are loved and then left. It does not mean they have forgotten how to be beautiful." "Mamas were tidy," the child whispered. "I expect they were, but I think a rose would rather be wild and looked at than tidy and shut up alone. I know I would." She crouched and broke off one blown crimson bloom low on the stem where it had nodded over the path, and tucked it behind Sophia's ear, where it sat enormous and ridiculous against the dark hair, and the child put a careful hand up to feel it, and did not take it down. They went along the paths slowly. Sophia named the colours. A petal came loose and stuck to Marianne's wrist with the damp of the morning, and she did not brush it off. For half an hour, in the hot-walled quiet, with the bees going, and the gravel warm through her thin slippers, Marianne forgot that she had been bought. She remembered when the shadow fell across the path. The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the gateway with the sun behind him, so that for a moment he was only a black shape filling it. Broad-shouldered, motionless. Then he came forward a pace into the light, and she saw his face, and the warmth went out of the morning as though a cloud had crossed it. "Sophia," he said. "Go to Mrs. Pruitt." The child's hand turned to ice in Marianne's. "Papa, the roses, to Mrs. Pruitt now." Sophia went. She went the way children go from that particular voice, quickly and without a word and without looking back, the crimson rose still absurd and bright behind her ear, and the small sound of her slippers on the gravel was the loudest thing in the garden until it was gone, and then there were only the two of them, and the bees, and a year of roses no one had been permitted to touch. "You will not," the Duke said. "Bring her here again. She wanted to see the roses." "This garden is not for—" He stopped. A muscle moved in the hard, clean jaw. He was looking at the blown crimson blooms and the drifts of fallen petals and the bees, and Marianne understood, watching his face, that he had not set foot in this place in a 12-month either, and that walking through the gate had cost him something she could only guess the size of. "They were hers," he said at last. "Lo, I know." Marianne stood very straight on the warm gravel, with the petal still clinging to her wrist. "Mrs. Pruitt told me nothing, Your Grace, before you accuse her. The child told me. She said her mama liked the roses, and now no one comes. She is 4 years old, and she lives in a house full of shut doors, and this morning she counted a gardener to 40 for entertainment, because there was nothing else in the world for her to do." "Do not," the Duke said, and his voice had dropped to the raw stripped register she had heard through the door, "presume to tell me about my own daughter. Then tell her about her mother." The words were out before she could weigh them. "She is forgetting, Your Grace. She told me there is a noise you used to make, and she can almost remember it. She is losing you both at once, the one who is gone, and the one who is standing in front of her. And she is 4, and she is doing it all alone in a nursery at the top of a stair, where she is not let to open the window above one hand." For a moment she thought she had gone too far. His face had shut like the lid of a box. The grey eyes were terrible. "You have been my wife," he said, "for 1 day. "Yes. And in 1 day I have learned more of what ails this house than you seem to have let yourself know in a year. That is not a boast. It is only that I came in from outside, where the windows still open." She drew a breath and made her voice gentler, because cruelty was easy and she did not want it. "I am not trying to take her mother's place. I told her so. I told her that place is hers forever. I am only trying to fill the chair next to it, because it is empty, and a child should not eat every dinner of her life across an empty chair." The Duke turned away from her. He stood with one hand on the warm brick of the wall, the way he had stood at the mantel the day he bought her, looking down a path of fallen petals at nothing. When he spoke again, the anger had drained out and left only something flat and exhausted behind it. "She had your trick of it," he said. "Eleanor, she would say a true thing straight out, in the middle of a drawing room, and watch it knock the wind out of grown men." A pause. I had forgotten how it felt to be on the receiving end. It is not, as it turns out, an improving sensation. And there, small, dry, bleak, but unmistakable, was the ghost of something that had once known how to laugh, surfacing for half a breath before it sank again. Marianne felt her own mouth move before she could stop it, the smallest startled curve, and saw him see it, and saw him look away from it as though it were a light too bright to bear. "Keep her from this garden," he said, and walked back to the gate. "That is the only thing I have ever asked you. Manage the rest as you see fit." He stopped under the arch of brick with the sun on him. "You seem determined to, regardless." He had not given her the freedom of the house in any words she could have repeated to a lawyer, but Marianne took it as given and spent the next 3 days taking it. She opened windows. She had the holland covers drawn off the morning room sofas and a fire of applewood lit against the evening damp, and she sat with Sophia in the long gold light and taught her cat's cradle with a length of worsted, and the child laughed twice, and each laugh fell into the cold house like a coin into a deep well, a long way down, a small, clear sound. She did not touch the withered flowers in the hall. She did not go near the Duchess's apartments. She did not go down the gallery to the room with the pianoforte. There were lines, and she felt for them in the dark like a woman feeling for the edge of a step. And she did not cross them, but she moved everything that was not a line by a hand's breadth toward the light, and Mrs. Pruitt watched her do it with a face that grew, day on day, less troubled, and more something Marianne could not name. "You'll have noticed," the housekeeper said on the 3rd evening, setting down the tea things in the unshrouded morning room, with a small grim satisfaction. "His Grace ate his dinner an hour later tonight. In the small dining room, which has a window on the rose walk. She arranged the cups. I'm not saying he looked out of it. I'm saying the chair he chose, of the 8 in that room, was the one a man would choose if he meant to look out of it and didn't want to be caught wanting to. That's all I'm saying. She straightened. I've kept this house 20 years, Your Grace. I know what a man's chairs tell me, even when his mouth won't. It was the longest speech Marianne had had from her, and there was a dry knowing in it that made her smile. And what do my chairs tell you, Mrs. Pruitt? That you sit nearest the door, said the housekeeper, like a woman who's not yet sure she's allowed to stay. We'll work on that. And she took up the tray and went out, and Marianne sat in the firelight a long while after, turning the loose ring on her finger and feeling, for the first time, the smallest beginning of a foothold in the great grey beast of a house. It lasted until the carriage came up the avenue the following noon. Marianne heard it before she saw it. The bright, fast rattle of a well-sprung chaise driven hard, the spurt of gravel, a coachman's call. From the morning-room window she watched it sweep round the limes and stop before the steps, all glossy black panels, and a crest on the door picked out in gold, and a footman down off the back before the wheels had ceased turning, and out of it, handed down by the footman's white glove, stepped the most beautiful woman Marianne had ever seen. She was perhaps 30, tall and very slender, with pale gold hair dressed close under a bonnet of deep peacock blue, and a travelling pelisse of the same blue that fitted her like water. Her face was a cold, perfect oval, fair-skinned, fine-boned, with a small, exquisite mouth and eyes of a blue so light they seemed almost silver at that distance. And she stood at the foot of the steps and looked up at the front of Ashbourne House with the unhurried proprietary survey of a woman who has come home and finds it has been left untidy in her absence. Mrs. Pruitt was suddenly in the doorway of the morning-room, and her square plain face had gone carefully blank. Lady Cordelia, she said, low and fast, the late Duchess's sister, younger sister, the Earl of Marsden's second daughter, Eleanor, was the elder. She has not been here since. She has not been here this 12-month. She did not write that she was coming. Does the Duke know she is here? The Duke, said Mrs. Pruitt grimly, will know in about the time it takes her to cross the hall. There's no stopping her. There never was. She and her Grace were chalk and cheese, and the cheese is in the churchyard, God rest her, and the chalk has just got down off a chaise in my front sweep. She drew a breath and smoothed her bombazine. Stand up, Your Grace, if you'll take my meaning. She'll have heard of the marriage by now. It'll be all round the county. And she'll have come to look at you. Let her find you standing. Marianne stood. The doors of the morning-room opened a moment later without anyone knocking, and Lady Cordelia Vane came in on a wave of cold violet scent, drawing off her gloves finger by finger, and her silver-blue gaze went round the unshrouded room, the drawn covers, the lit fire, the length of worsted abandoned on the sofa where Sophia had left it, and came to rest on Marianne with an interest so sharp and so entirely without warmth that it was like being touched by something cold. So, she said. Her voice was light and clear and beautifully placed. You are the bride. She finished with the gloves. How extraordinary. I had the news from Lady Tremont, who had it from her woman, who had it from the curate's wife, and I confess I did not believe a word of it until this moment. Julian, married. To the silver eyes travelled down Marianne's plain morning gown and up again, to a Miss Hale, of nowhere I have ever heard of. For £5,000. She smiled. It was a very lovely smile. The county is in transports. You have given the dinner tables a 12-month's conversation in a single afternoon. You are very welcome to it, Marianne said. I had no use for the conversation myself. Something flickered in the silver eyes, surprise perhaps, that the bought girl answered back. Then Lady Cordelia laughed, a small silvery fall of sound, and crossed to the fire and held her pale hands to it, though the July day was warm. I see, she said. You have spirit. They always think that will be enough. She turned, and the lovely face had gone serious, almost kind, and the kindness was the most frightening thing about it. May I give you a piece of advice, Miss Hale? Forgive me, Your Grace. I shall not manage the title for a while yet. You must allow me my grief. May I? One woman to another. I knew this house when it was the happiest in Wiltshire. I knew my sister in it. And I know Julian. I have known him since he was a boy of 19 who could not look at Eleanor across a ballroom without forgetting his own name. Then, you knew him before I did, Marianne said evenly. You have the advantage of me. I knew him whole, said Lady Cordelia, which you never shall. You think, I see it in your face, that there is a man in there still, behind the cold, that you have caught some glimpse of him, some night, and that with patience you will draw him out. The silver eyes were steady. Let me save you a great deal of heartache. There is nothing to draw out. He spent it. All of it. On her. The last of whatever he had. He spent the night before she was taken from us. They quarrelled, Miss Hale. Did you know that? The night before. Words neither of them could call back. And in the morning she was gone, before either of them could mend it, and he has been mending it ever since. Alone, at that wretched instrument, with her picture for sheet music. You have heard it, I dare say. The whole house has heard it. He plays her lullaby to a portrait every night, and there is not one note of it left over for you. Nor will there ever be. Nor, and you would do well to learn this early, for that child. The fire snapped. Outside the blackbird had stopped. Marianne stood very still, and felt the words go into her one by one, neat and cold and barbed, and understood that some of them were true, and could not therefore be simply dismissed, and that the woman saying them knew exactly which were true, and had wrapped the rest inside them like a stone in a snowball. You have a great deal of feeling, Marianne said at last, for a man you describe so coolly, and for a sister you have not. By Mrs. Pruitt's account, come to mourn in 12 months, until the precise week a new duchess took your place at his table. The lovely face did not change, but the silver eyes went flat and hard as river ice, and for one instant the kindness fell away entirely, and what was underneath looked out, and it was not grief. I came, Lady Cordelia said softly, for Sophia. My sister's child. The only thing of Eleanor's left in the world, being raised in a tomb by a man who cannot bear the sight of her because she has her mother's eyes. Did you know that? That he can scarcely look at her? I have written to my father. The Earl of Marsden takes a very particular interest in his granddaughter's welfare, in her guardianship. Should it ever be shown that this house is no fit place to raise her. She drew on her gloves again, finger by finger, slowly, and here I find the child running wild in a forbidden garden, supervised by a stranger her father bought a fortnight after. Well, you see how it looks. You see how it will read, in a letter, to an earl. She smiled the lovely smile. I shall stay a little while, I think, to satisfy myself. You will not mind. There are a great many rooms standing empty. She swept out to give her orders to the footman, leaving the cold violet scent behind her like a stain on the air, and Marianne sat down rather suddenly on the arm of the sofa, because her knees had decided the matter for her. A quarrel the night before. Words neither of them could call back. That was the fissure she had seen straight through, then. Not grief alone, but guilt. The worst kind. The kind that has no one left to ask for pardon. And the lullaby on the music stand was Eleanor's. And he was not mourning at that instrument so much as confessing, over and over, to a face turned down, because he could not bear to have it look at him. And now there was a beautiful cold woman under his roof, writing letters to an earl, counting the empty chairs and the wild roses and the stranger in the morning room, building a case out of true things badly arranged, that the Duke could not look at his own child, that the house was a tomb, that Sophia would be better carried off to Marsden, and raised among people who at least kept their windows open and their gardens pruned. Marianne thought of the child's hand turning cold in hers at the garden gate. Papa, the roses. She thought of "Are you my mamma now?" asked of a stranger on a staircase, because there was no one nearer to ask. She found Mrs. Pruitt in the still room, sorting linen with more violence than the linen required. She means to take Sophia, Marianne said. She means to take the house, said Mrs. Pruitt flatly, snapping a sheet. Sophia's the lever, that's all. She was Eleanor's sister, but she was never Eleanor. She wanted this, all of it, the title, and the manor, and the man, and her sister had the lot, and now her sister's gone and there's a chance to have it after all, through the child. If she can only get the Duke declared unfit and herself made guardian, and her father's lawyers set loose on the guardianship of the estate till Lady Sophie's grown. She slapped the sheet onto the pile. And the cruel beauty of it, Your Grace, is that she's not lying. He can't hardly look at the child. The house is a tomb. She'll write nothing in those letters that isn't true. And true things, set down cold by an earl's daughter, will weigh more with a court than anything you or I could say back. Then we must make them stop being true, Marianne said. Mrs. Pruitt looked up at her, and the something she could not name was back in the housekeeper's dark eyes, full this time, and unmistakable. It was hope, and it was terrified of itself. You take her on? She said. Lady Cordelia? You'd a deal rather not. She fights dirty and she fights long. And you've been married 4 days, and your own father's debts are the only thing standing between you and the parish. I have been bought and sold and married in 11 minutes, and told to my face I am to expect no affection as long as I live, Marianne said. I find I have very little left to be frightened of, Mrs. Pruitt, and I will not stand in a doorway near the exit while a child who shared her broken horse with me is parcelled up and carried off by a woman who smells of violets and means her no good at all. That night the pianoforte did not play. Marianne lay in the blue room and listened for it. She had not known how much she had come to listen for it, until the silence stretched out long and total and wrong, and at last she rose and took her candle and went out into the dark gallery, telling herself nothing this time, not even a lie. The thread of light was gone from beneath the far door. The house was black and breathing, but as she stood there in the cold draught with the candle guttering, she heard, from the other end of the passage, from the wing she had been forbidden, a sound she could not at first place, a small, stifled, rhythmic sound, and she went toward it on bare, silent feet, past the shrouded furniture, past the woken portraits, until she stood outside the nursery door and understood that it was Sophia, awake at midnight, crying as quietly as a child of 4 had somehow already learned to cry, into a pillow, so that no one would hear and worry and make their face go wrong. And as Marianne reached for the latch, another door opened down the dark length of the gallery, and a candle bloomed gold, and Lady Cordelia Vane stood in the passage, in a wrapper of pale silk, with her gold hair down, looking toward the same small sound, and her silver eyes met Marianne's across the breathing dark with the unhurried satisfaction of a player who has just seen the board fall exactly as she set it. The poor lamb, she said softly, crying for her mother. How fortunate, Your Grace, that her aunt has come. Marianne did not answer her. She lifted the latch and went in. The nursery was dark, but for the thin grey wash of moonlight under the half-shutter, and the small sound came from the bed in the corner, muffled and rhythmic, and trying so hard to be silent that it broke Marianne's heart twice over. Once for the grief, and once for the discipline of it, that a child of 4 had learned to fold her weeping small. She crossed the cold boards and sat down on the edge of the little bed and put her hand on the shaking back, and felt Sophia go rigid, caught, ashamed. It is only me, Marianne said. It is only Marianne. You needn't stop. There is no rule against it tonight. I have suspended all the rules. I am new, and I am allowed. For a moment the child held herself stiff. Then she turned over and came up against Marianne all at once, hot and damp and clinging, her face pressed into the wool of the wrapper, and the careful quiet weeping broke at last into the ordinary loud kind. The kind that does not mind being heard. And Marianne gathered her in and rocked her, and said nothing useful at all, only the soft wordless sounds one makes, while behind them in the doorway the candle did not move. I dreamed of Mama, Sophia said into her shoulder, when she could. I dreamed she was in the roses, and I went out to her and she turned round, and it was not her face. It was nobody's face. She shuddered. I can't make her face come right any more. I try and try in the dark, and it goes. I know, Marianne murmured. I know, my heart. Sophia, Lady Cordelia's voice came light and clear from the threshold, and the candle advanced, and the cold violet scent came with it into the warm small dark. Sophia, darling, Look, your aunt is here. Your own Aunt Cordelia, who held you the very day you were born. Come to me, lamb. Come to one of your own blood." The child's arms tightened round Marianne's neck. "She is half asleep," Marianne said, without turning. "She does not want moving from one pair of arms to another, like a parcel at this hour. In the morning she will be glad to see you." "She is frightened," said Lady Cordelia, and she came round the bed so the candlelight fell across all three of them, and her lovely face was bent into a shape of tenderness, so finished, so perfectly judged, that Marianne understood it had been practiced. And no wonder. A strange house grown stranger. A stranger in her nursery in the dark. "Sophia, sweetheart, you remember your aunt. You remember the silver thimble I gave you, and the songs." Sophia did not lift her face. But Marianne felt the small body waver, the pull of the named thimble, the named songs, the blood claim, and she held very still, and let the child choose, because to grip her tighter would have been to do the same thing Cordelia was doing, only from the other side. "I want Marianne," Sophia said. The silence after it had a texture. Marianne felt the words settle on her like the rose petal had settled on her wrist, light and clinging, and impossible afterward to brush away. Over the dark head she met Lady Cordelia's silver gaze, and watched the practiced tenderness hold its shape by main force, while something behind it went to ice. "How quickly," Lady Cordelia murmured, "the young attach. Like ivy, to whatever wall is nearest." She straightened and drew her pale silk wrapper close, and the candle lit the underside of her chin and the cold perfect line of her jaw. "Sleep, then, lamb. We shall have a great many mornings." And to Marianne, very softly, so the child could not catch the change of register beneath the sweetness, "You comfort her tonight." It will read all the better in the letter. The bought stranger crept to the child at midnight, while the father did not stir from his locked wing. "You are arranging my evidence for me, Your Grace." I could almost be grateful. She went out and took her candle and her violets with her, and Marianne sat in the dark with the warm weight of the child going slowly slack against her, breathing into sleep at last, and thought that she had won the small thing and lost ground on the large one, both in the same 5 minutes, and that this was perhaps the particular genius of Lady Cordelia Vane, to make every kindness one performed into a stone for the wall she was building. She did not see the Duke at all the next day, nor the day after. He kept to his library and his estate room, and the wing she could not enter, and took his dinner now in the small room with the window on the rose walk, an hour later each evening, and Mrs. Pruitt reported the movements of his chairs, like a scout bringing word of an army. But Lady Cordelia she saw everywhere. The beautiful cold woman had unpacked herself into the house like damp into plaster. She appeared in the morning room when Marianne taught Sophia her letters, and watched with her head tilted, and made small light remarks that were each a hook with a barb folded inside the bait. "You teach her your own hand, I see," she observed, leaning over the slate where Sophia's chalk had laboured out a wobbling row of letters. How practical. Eleanor had a beautiful hand. Italian masters. But then, Eleanor had the raising one gives a future duchess, and you, of course, must do as you were taught, wherever that was. The silver eyes lifted, all sweetness. "Where were you taught, Your Grace?" One hears so little. It is the not knowing that the county finds so delicious. "I was taught at home," Marianne said, "by my mother, who is gone, and afterward by myself, out of whatever books the house still held when the bailiffs had finished choosing. I write a plain hand, because I learned plainly. Sophia will write a better one than mine, because she has masters to come, and a slate that no one will carry off in a cart. Is there anything else you should like to know? I would always rather be asked than whispered about." Something moved at the door. Marianne looked up and saw the Duke standing in the passage with a sheaf of papers in his hand, arrested. He had meant only to pass, she thought, and had been stopped by her voice, and now stood half in shadow with his slate eyes going from her to Cordelia and back, and she could not read what was in them. Then he went on. But that evening Mrs. Pruitt brought word that His Grace had asked, of no one in particular, whether Lady Sophia was getting on with her letters, and had been told that she was. and had said nothing further, and had eaten the whole of his dinner instead of the half he generally left. "He asked, Mrs. Pruitt said, setting down the candle with both hands as though it were precious, of his own accord. He has not asked after that child since. He has not asked. A year and more." She straightened, and her square plain face worked once. "You are doing it, Your Grace. Whatever it is, don't you dare leave off." But the asking, Marianne thought, lying awake, was a thread, and Lady Cordelia was a pair of shears, and the thread did not yet know how thin it was. The flip came on the 4th day of Lady Cordelia's visit, in the long gold heat of the afternoon, and it came, as the worst things do, dressed as a kindness. Marianne had left Sophia napping in the cool of the nursery, and gone down to the still room to learn from Mrs. Pruitt where the household accounts were kept, because a duchess who managed the linen, she had reasoned, was a duchess less easily described as a passing fancy. She was gone, at the most, 3/4 of an hour. And when she came back up the east stair, the nursery door stood open, and the bed was empty, and the worsted and the slate lay just as they had been, and Sophia was nowhere in the room. The casement stood wide, not one hand's breadth, wide, all the way, onto the warm, bright drop of the garden. For one terrible instant the world went white and silent, and very far away. Then, Marianne was at the window, with her heart slamming, leaning out into the smell of cut grass and hot brick. And there, below, small and dark and entirely safe, Sophia stood in the middle of the forbidden rose garden, with a fallen crimson bloom in each hand, looking up, having heard the casement bang back against the wall. And beside her, one pale hand resting light as benediction on the child's dark hair, stood Lady Cordelia Vane. "There you are," Lady Cordelia called up, and her clear voice carried sweetly across the hot, still air. "We wondered where you had got to. The poor lamb woke, and you were nowhere, and she would come out to the roses, and what was I to do but bring her safe? Children should not be left to climb to open windows alone." A pause, exquisitely placed. Anything might happen. Marianne went down the stairs faster than was dignified, out through the morning room and across the terrace, and through the brick arch into the wall of damask scent, and she came to a stop on the warm gravel, with her breath ragged, and Sophia ran to her and pressed the 2 crushed roses into her hands. All innocence, all delight. Aunt Cordelia opened the big window. The child said happily, "She said you would not mind, because you opened all the others. And she brought me to the roses." "You said the roses, Marianne. You said we should always." "I know what I said." Marianne went down on her knees on the gravel, and held the small shoulders, and looked the child over from crown to slipper, every inch, and found her whole. Then she stood, and put Sophia behind her, and faced the beautiful woman in the peacock blue, and understood that she had walked, at a run, straight into a thing that had been laid for her, with great care. "You took her from the nursery," Marianne said quietly, "and you left the window standing open behind you, and then you stood in the garden waiting for me to come to it and see. I rescued a child who had been left sleeping and unattended," said Lady Cordelia, and her face was all soft concern, while her guardian was occupied below stairs with the housekeeper and the linen. "That is what I did, Your Grace. That is what happened. The window, the height, the want of supervision. I should never forgive myself if I had not gone up when I did." The silver eyes were perfectly steady, perfectly kind, and underneath the kindness was the cold, flat satisfaction Marianne had seen in the midnight passage. "You may tell it however you like. But I was the one in the room, and I am an earl's daughter, and you are a debt that was settled. Whose telling do you suppose an honest magistrate will credit when it is written down?" "Sophia," Marianne said, without turning, in a voice she kept very level for the child's sake, "run up to Mrs. Pruitt now, there's my brave girl, and ask her for bread and honey, and tell her I said you might have it in the morning room like a grown lady." The child went, clutching her roses, glad, and when the small slippers had pattered away across the terrace and in at the door, Marianne turned the whole of herself upon Lady Cordelia, and found that the white silent terror had burned off and left something behind it that was hard and clear and unfamiliar, and very nearly cold. You used her, Marianne said. A child of 4. You carried her to an open window so that you might have a height to point at in a letter. You frightened me half out of my reason on purpose, to see how it sat on you, and I will tell you how it sits, madam. It sits ill. I have known a great many varieties of cruelty. My creditors taught me most of them. But I had not before met the kind that picks up a child to use as a pen. For one instant, the lovely face cracked clean across, and what looked out of it was not grief, and was not even anger, but something older and hungrier than either, and then it closed again, smooth and fair and perfect, like water over a stone. You will learn to mind your tongue with me, Lady Cordelia said softly, or you will not be in this house to mind it at all. Do you imagine he will keep you? A girl he bought to clear a tradesman's book, against his wife's own sister, against the Earl of Marsden? When the choice is put to him plainly, the bought bride or the family that was his wife's, which way do you suppose Julian falls? She drew on her gloves. The slow finger-by-finger ritual that Marianne was coming to understand was the closing of an account. You have a few weeks, perhaps. I should spend them packing. She went up the gravel, and in through the arch, peacock blue against the blowing crimson, and Marianne stood alone, in the year of unpruned roses, with the bees going on in their low contented thunder, as though nothing whatever had happened, and felt the trap close, neat and quiet, around the only thing in the house she had let herself love. She did not go to the Duke. She had meant to, had rehearsed it, climbing back through the hot still rooms, the plain account she would give him of the open window and the waiting woman in the garden. But at the door of the library her courage turned in her hand, like a key in a stiff lock, because she did not know him, not truly. She had 4 days of a married stranger, and one stolen glimpse of him weeping at an instrument, and against that she had Lady Cordelia's questions sitting in her chest like a swallowed stone. Which way do you suppose Julian falls? So she did not knock. And that, she would think afterward, was the second trap. The one she set for herself. Because Lady Cordelia reached him first. It was past 10 that night, when Marianne heard the voices. She had gone down for a book. The morning room fire had burned to a red eye, and the house was settling into its dark. And the library door stood the breadth of a hand ajar, and the lamplight lay in a gold blade across the marble, and within it, Lady Cordelia's clear-placed voice was running on, low and warm and reasonable, the most dangerous voice Marianne had ever heard. And I say it only because I love her, Julian, and because I loved Eleanor, and because someone in this house must say the hard thing to you when no one else will dare. Look at it as my father will look at it. A child left at an open window, a stranger with no name and no people, set over her, 4 days after a marriage the whole county is laughing at. You cannot keep her here. Not like this. Not when there is Marsden, and her grandfather, and rooms full of light, and women of her own blood to raise her as Eleanor would have wished. You know I am right. You have always known the child should never have been kept in this mausoleum you have made. With you, who cannot so much as look at her. A silence. Marianne stood frozen in the dark, with the cold marble under her bare feet, and her heart going slow and enormous, and she should have moved, and she could not. I can look at her, the Duke said. His voice was very low. Can you? When did you last? When did you last take her on your knee, Julian, or hear her say her prayers, or do one single thing a father does, that was not done for you by servants, and by that woman? A rustle of silk, the small sound of a hand laid on a sleeve. I am not your enemy. I am the last friend you have left who remembers what you were. Let me take her to my father. Let me save the one piece of Eleanor that can still be saved. And let this poor bought girl go back to wherever she came from, with her jointure and her freedom, and no harm done. It is the kindest thing. It is the only kind thing. You have nothing left to give either of them. You told me so yourself, the night of the funeral. You said it in this very room. And the Duke of Ashbourne, who had warm hands and a buried heart and a daughter with her mother's eyes, said, after a long time, in a voice scraped down to nothing at all, yes. I did say that. Marianne did not stay to hear more. She went back up through the dark on feet that did not seem to belong to her, past the woken portraits, past the withered flowers no one would throw away. And she sat down on the edge of the strange bed in the blue room, with the wooden horse facing the window and Captain's painted eye gone black in the dark. And she put the back of her hand against her mouth and held very still until the worst of it had passed through her. He had not refused. That was the whole of it, sitting cold in her chest. Faced with the open window and the Earl and the cool, reasonable voice of the woman who smelled of violets, he had not stood up and refused. He had said, "Yes, I did say that," and let the rest hang. And somewhere below her in the lamplit dark Lady Cordelia was even now folding her victory finger by finger into her glove. She thought she would not sleep. She did not undress. She sat in the wrapper with her arms round her knees and watched the square of window go from black to the first grey thinning of the short summer night. And she made herself look squarely at the thing she had been refusing to look at since the carriage came up the avenue, that she had let herself begin to hope. In 4 days. In a tomb of a house, against every word of warning the man himself had given her at the very start. There will be no affection. The part of me that might have given you that is in the ground. He had told her plainly, and she had heard a lullaby through a door and decided she knew better. And now there was a child who said, "I want Marianne into the dark," and a letter half written to an earl, and a husband who, asked to choose, had not chosen at all, which was its own kind of choosing, and the cruelest, because it left nothing to forgive and nothing to fight. Toward dawn she rose, stiff and cold, and went to the window. The garden lay grey and then, as she watched, slowly warming, the limes black against a sky going pearl, a thrush starting up somewhere, the long lawn silvered with dew, and beyond the wall the wild roses just beginning to take their colour back from the night. And she understood, looking at it, that there was one thing Lady Cordelia had not counted, in all her cold, careful arithmetic, and it was the simplest thing of all, and Marianne had it because she had nothing else. She had no one waiting for her anywhere, no house to be sent back to, no people, no place. There was nothing behind her at all. Which meant there was nothing to lose by standing, and standing was the one thing a woman with nothing could still afford to do. She found Mrs. Pruitt in the grey kitchen, with the fires not yet drawn up, and the housekeeper took one look at her face and set down the kindling. "She's done it then," Mrs. Pruitt said. "I heard the bell go in the library last night. Late, I knew the shape of it." She wiped her hands slowly on her apron. "Is it Marsden? Is she taking the child to Marsden?" "She is trying to," Marianne said. "She left the nursery window standing wide yesterday, and carried Sophia to the rose garden, and waited for me to find the empty bed, so that there should be a height and a want of supervision to set down in the letter. And last night she put it to his grace that he is unfit, and that the child should go, and that I should be sent away with my jointure, and he," her voice held, "just, he did not say no." Mrs. Pruitt's dark eyes went flat and old. "No," she said, "he wouldn't. That's not strength in her and weakness in him, your grace, though it'll wear that coat. It's the guilt. She knows where it lives in him, and she sets her thumb on it. She's done it for years. Long before Eleanor was lost, she did it. The pair of them, sisters and never alike, the one all warmth and the other all want." She picked the kindling up again, and her square hands were not quite steady. "There's a thing I've held my tongue on. I held it at the altar, and I've held it since, for it's not mine to tell, and it does no good in the telling. But you're standing in it now to the neck, and you've a right to know what manner of woman you're fighting. Then tell me." Mrs. Pruitt looked at the cold hearth for a long moment. "The quarrel," she said. "The night before her grace was taken from us. He's carried it a year and more, that they parted on hard words and never mended them, and he's played that lullaby to her picture every night to beg a pardon she can't give." She drew a breath. "But it wasn't the small thing he thinks it. It wasn't a husband and wife crossing each other over nothing and meaning to make it up at breakfast. There was a letter come to her grace that day, from her sister. And whatever was in it, Eleanor went up to his grace, white as her own collar, and they were behind that library door the half of the night, and the words that came through it, 'I'd come to bank the fire.' The words weren't about each other at all. She met Marianne's eyes. They were about her, about Lady Cordelia, and what she'd done, or wanted, or threatened. And the next morning her Grace would go out, against all sense, in weather no one should have braved, on the Marsden Road, toward her sister, and she never came home. The kitchen was very still. Somewhere above, the house was beginning to wake. "He thinks he sent his wife to her end with hard words, Mrs. Pruitt said, very low. "He's grieved a year on it, and the woman he's grieved beside, the woman he's about to hand his daughter to, because she's told him he's unfit to keep her, is the one whose letter put Eleanor on that road in the first place. And he doesn't know it, or he won't let himself. And she'll see to it he never does." Marianne stood in the cold kitchen, with the grey light coming up at the window and the whole shape of it turning over in her at last, the trap, and the trapper, and the price, and the one buried thing that could break it all open if she could only reach it before the letter reached the Earl. "Where," she said, "is that letter now?" Mrs. Pruitt's eyes did not waver. "Burned," I'd have said, this 12-month. She paused. But her Grace kept everything her sister ever sent her, in a rosewood box, in the Duchess's apartments. The rooms his Grace has let no living soul enter since the day she was lost, not me, not the maids, not him. She set down the kindling one last time, "And you're the one woman in this house, your Grace, that he told to keep out of them above all the rest." Above them, down the length of the waking house, a door opened, and a clear light voice called for her maid and her chocolate, and began, unhurried and sweet, and certain of its ground, to come down the great stair. Mrs. Pruitt's hand went to the ring of keys at her waist before Marianne had asked for them. She turned them over with her thumb, 20 years of iron, worn bright at the wards, and stopped at one that was not bright at all, that was dull with a year of being passed over, and she worked it off the ring and held it out on her flat palm. "I never gave it him back," she said, very low. "When he locked them rooms, he took his own key and threw the bolt and told me the house was to forget that wing. But there's 2 keys to every door in a house this age, your Grace, and the housekeeper keeps the second. And his Grace was too deep in his grief to think of it. And I was too. Her mouth worked. I was too much a coward to remind him. So it sat on my ring this 12-month, burning a hole, and I've walked past that door near every day and let it lie." She pressed the key into Marianne's hand and closed her fingers over it. "Go now," while she's at her chocolate. She takes the half of an hour over it, and she'll have the maid in to dress her hair after, for she means to look her best when the blow falls. She always did dress for a victory. You've that long, maybe less. Above them the clear voice was descending, sweet and unhurried, asking the maid whether the morning was fine, remarking that it would be a pity to spend such a day indoors. Marianne closed her hand round the cold iron until the wards bit her palm. "If she finds me in there," Marianne said. "Then she finds you," said Mrs. Pruitt, "and you'll think of something, for you always do. Go up the back way, by the still-room stair. It comes out by the gallery and she'll not see you cross. And your Grace, the housekeeper, caught her sleeve as she turned. Whatever you find, whatever's in that box, you bring it down the front stair, where there's light, and you do not let her have it in her hands for 1/2 of 1 second, for she'll feed it to the first fire she passes. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Marianne said, and went. The back stair was narrow and gritty and smelled of cold ash and tallow. A servant's stair, the green baize door at the top of it swollen in its frame so that she had to lean her shoulder to it. It gave onto the gallery's far end, into the high grey churchlight, and she came out among the shrouded shapes and stood a moment with her heart going hard, listening. Below and away she heard the chink of porcelain, the light voice running on. She turned the other way, toward the wing she had been forbidden, and the door at the end of it stood dark and shut, and the dull key was warm now from her grip. It turned stiff. The wards had rusted in a year of stillness, and she had to work it both ways, her breath loud in her own ears, before the bolt drew back with a groan that seemed to fill the whole sleeping house. She froze. No step came, only the thrush in the limes, and far off the bright clink of a spoon. She pushed the door, and the Duchess's apartments opened before her like a held breath let go. The smell came first, not decay, but the ghost of a scent she knew. The very violets Cordelia wore. faint and stale, and under it something sweeter. Rosewater gone old. The shutters were closed fast, and the air was thick and brown. And as her eyes found their feet, she saw that the room had been left exactly as a woman leaves a room she means to come back to within the hour. A wrapper of pale silk laid across a chair. A hairbrush on the dressing table with a single fair hair caught in it still. A book face down on the coverlet, its place kept this 12-month by a husband who could not bear to close it and lose where she had stopped reading. Marianne stood very still in the doorway and felt the grief of the room come up around her knees like cold water. This was where he came then, not only to the instrument. This was the drawer he had locked and stopped opening. And she had no right to be in it, none at all, and she made herself cross the threshold anyway, because there was a child whose whole life was being weighed out in a letter, and the dead, she caught the word and set it gently down. The lost could spare her this. The rosewood box sat on the writing table by the shuttered window, where a woman would sit to answer her sister's letters. It was not locked. Marianne lifted the lid, and the small brass hinges gave their tiny cry, and inside lay a year of one sister's life folded in another's keeping. Letters in a fine, sloping Italian hand, tied in faded ribbon, ordered by date. The topmost ones gone soft with handling. Eleanor had kept everything Cordelia ever sent her. Marianne understood it in a breath. Not love, or not only love, but a wariness so old it had become a habit. A careful woman keeping a record of a dangerous one. She turned them with shaking fingers to the last. And there it was, the final letter. The date upon it the very day before the Duchess was lost. The paper creased deep where it had been read, and refolded, and read again. Marianne carried it to the thin blade of light that came through the gap in the shutter, and tilted it, and read. The clear voice in her memory, and the clear hand on the page, were the same. My dearest Eleanor, it began, all sweetness, and then it turned, by the third line, into something else entirely. And Marianne read it through once fast, and then again slowly, with the blood going cold and then hot in her, and understood that she held in her hand the whole of it, set down by the woman herself, in ink that would not lie the way a face could lie. She did not hear the door. She heard the voice. How resourceful you are, said Lady Cordelia. Marianne turned. The beautiful woman stood in the doorway with her gold hair half-dressed, loose at one side where the maid had been called off, and a wrapper of peacock silk drawn close, and her silver eyes had gone to the box, to the broken seal of stillness all around her, to the letter in Marianne's hand, and for once the practiced face was not soft. It was white, and bare, and frightened, and the fright made it, for the first time, almost human. Give that to me, she said. No, Marianne said. You have no notion what you are holding. Cordelia came forward a step, into the brown dim air, her pale hand out. It is private grief. It is my sister's correspondence, which a stranger has broken into a sealed room to pour through like a... Give it to me. You have no right, you have no name, it is your hand, Marianne said. It is your letter. Shall I read it to you, my lady, since you know it so ill? She lifted the page to the light, and Cordelia stopped where she stood, and Marianne read, and her own voice came out low and steady and terrible in the dead air of the room. You will not have him, Eleanor, however high you hold your head. You took the title that should have been offered me. You took the house. You took Julian, who looked at me first, who would have come to me if you had not put yourself forever between. And I tell you plainly, sister, since you force me to it, there are things I know of your husband's family, of the old business at Ashbourne, that the world does not know, and that you would not have it know. Meet me on the Marsden Road on Thursday, and hear me out, or by God I will make them known, and your fine Julian will thank his cold proud wife for the ruin of his name. The silence in the Duchess's apartments was absolute. You sent for her, Marianne said, in weather no one should have gone out in. You threatened her husband's name to bring her, alone, onto the Marsden Road, and she went, because she was protecting him, the very man you have spent a year telling him he failed. And she never came home. And he has knelt at her picture every night since, begging her pardon for a quarrel that was never with her at all. It was with you. The words that came through that library door were about you. Stop, Cordelia said. You let him grieve. Marianne's voice did not rise. It went lower, and the lower it went, the more it filled the room. You let that man break himself in half on a guilt that belonged to you, and then you came back, and you used the breaking of him to take his child, because you could not have the husband, so you would have the daughter, and the house, and the name after all. Through Sophia. A child of 4. She folded the letter against her breast. I have met a great many cruelties, my lady. I told you so in the garden, but I had never until this week met one that would put a grieving man's hand round the knife and guide it into his own heart, and call it kindness while it did it. Lady Cordelia's lovely mouth opened and shut, and for one instant the silver eyes filled with rage or terror or grief. Marianne could not have said, and she thought perhaps Cordelia herself could not have said either, the three having grown so long together that they wore one face. Then the pale hand shot out fast as a snake for the letter, and Marianne stepped back, and the box went over, and a year of letters slid across the floor between them in a white drift. He will not believe you, Cordelia said, breathing hard, all the music gone out of her voice, and only the want left, raw and ugly. A debt he settled. A nobody. You think you will carry that paper down to him, and he will fall at your feet? He will think you forged it to keep your place. He will think you a schemer who broke into his lost wife's rooms and rifled her grief for a weapon. I have a year of his trust, Miss Hale, and you have 4 days. Which way do you suppose he falls? Why don't we go and ask him? Said the Duke of Ashbourne from the doorway. He stood in the bare grey light of the passage in his shirt-sleeves, and his face was the colour of the ash on the cold hearths, and his slate eyes had gone from the overturned box to the scattered letters to the 2 women standing among them, and last of all to the page held against his wife's breast. How long he had been there, Marianne could not tell. Long enough. His hand on the doorframe had the white knuckle she knew, but his voice, when it came again, was not raw. It was quiet and level, and it had a flaw under it she had not heard in him before. I heard a door I locked a year ago, he said, grown open. I came to put out whoever had dared it. His eyes came to Marianne and held. Read it again. From the beginning. Aloud, to me. Cordelia made a sound. Julian, she has forged. You cannot. That is Eleanor's private. Cordelia, he did not look at her. I have read 10,000 of your letters, and as many of your sisters. I know both your hands as I know my own. If my wife reads me one word that is not yours, I will know it before she reaches the end of the line. Now he looked, and what was in his face turned the beautiful woman to stone. Read it, Marianne. And Marianne read it again, slowly, all of it, into the still brown air of the room his wife had never come back to, and watched it go into him the way the truth she had told him in the dark passage had gone into him. The long fall and then, far below, the splash. Only this was no pebble. This was the whole drowned year of him coming up at once. She saw the moment the words the Marsden Road on Thursday reached him. She saw his face when he understood where his wife had been going, and why, and toward whom, and what she had been carrying in her quiet, proud heart when she went out into the weather alone to keep his name safe from her own sister's mouth. He put his hand over his eyes, once, the way she had seen him do behind the pianoforte. Then he took it down, and he was not a stone, and he was not weeping. He was, for the first time since she had met him, entirely awake. All this year, he said, to no one, I thought I sent her out with hard words. He turned the thought over slowly, like a man examining a wound he had not known the shape of. The hard words were never hers to answer for, nor mine. She came up to me white as her collar, with a letter in her hand, and would not show it me, and we quarrelled because she would not tell me what threatened us. She meant to spare me, and in the morning she was gone to deal with it herself. His grey gaze rose and fixed on Cordelia, and it was terrible in its calm. To deal with you. She chose to go, Cordelia said. Her voice had climbed, thin and bright. I never made her. I asked her to come and talk. Julian, sisters talk. It was the weather that... I have grieved her a year. I held you while you wept. I am the only one who... You wore my wife's scent, the Duke said, into my house. You sat at her table and held my daughter on your knee and told me, in the room where she and I last spoke, that I was unfit to keep the only thing of her left in the world. You did it with her letter sitting in this box not 40 feet above our heads, knowing what it held. He took one step into the room, and Cordelia took one back, into the drift of white paper. You did not come to mourn your sister. You came to finish taking the things she had that you wanted. And you used my grief, which you yourself had built, brick on brick, as your ladder. You will regret this, Lady Cordelia said. The white frightened thing had gone out of her face, and the cold flat want had come back, the river ice. And she drew the peacock silk close, and lifted her chin to the angle Marianne had seen at the foot of the steps a week ago, surveying a house she meant to have. My father will hear how I was spoken to. He will hear of a sealed room broken open, and a dead woman's letters used to, your father. The Duke said, will hear from me. Today, by my own hand, by express. He will hear that his second daughter wrote a threat against my family's name to lure his elder daughter onto a storm-struck road alone, and that I have the letter, in her hand, and that I will lay it before him, and before any court in England that presumes to inquire into the guardianship of my child. He had crossed to the writing table. He stood with his fingertips upon it, squaring nothing, for there was nothing on it now to square. You came to take Sophia to Marsden on the strength of an open window. I will let you take to Marsden instead the knowledge that if you ever again come within the sight of her, or of my wife, or of these gates, the whole of the county whose dinner tables you prize so highly will read that letter over their soup. Do you understand me, Cordelia? You taught me how a true thing, badly arranged, can be made to weigh in a letter. I have learnt the lesson. I have a truer one, and it arranges itself. For a long moment, Lady Cordelia Vane stood among the scattered letters of the sister she had envied past all reason. And the lovely cold oval of her face worked through its whole repertory. Sweetness, grief, appeal, threat, and found that not one of them had any purchase left, that the man before her had at last stepped out of the dark where she had kept him, and that there was nothing in her hand at all. And what was left, when the masks had each been tried and dropped, was a woman who had wanted one life so long and so hard that she had broken everything she could reach trying to take it, and had reached the end with empty gloves. She was always the fortunate one, Cordelia said. Her voice had gone quite flat. Eleanor, everything fell to her hand, even you. She looked at Marianne, and the silver eyes were almost wondering. And now even her leavings fall to a creature off a tradesman's ledger. There is no justice in it. There is no justice in any of it, Marianne agreed quietly. She is lost, and a child cries in the dark for a face she cannot keep, and you have spent yourself to ash for want of a thing that was never yours. No, there is no justice. There is only what we do now. She stooped, and gathered the fallen letters one by one back into the rosewood box, gently, in order, a year of a woman's life put back in its keeping. Mrs. Pruitt will have the chaise brought round. I think you had better not be at Ashbourne when the sun is high. Lady Cordelia drew the silk close, and turned, and went out through the door she had no key to, and would never pass again, and her step on the gallery board was quick and even, and she did not look back, and the cold violet scent of her went down the great stair and out of the house, and did not come into it any more. Below, after a while, came the bright fast rattle of a well-sprung chaise driven hard, the spurt of gravel, the diminishing of wheels along the mile of limes, and then the summer quiet of the downs came back, and the thrush and the bees beginning in the warming day. They stood among the wreck of the room, the husband and the wife of 1 week, with the letter that had broken a year of lies lying on the writing table between them, and for a while neither of them found the way to speak. "I told you," the Duke said at last, "that you would learn the value of what I offered you. I told you there would be no affection, that the part of me that might give it was in the ground at Ashbourne Church." He looked round the brown-shuttered room, at the wrapper on the chair, at the book face down with its place kept, and his voice was very low. "I have spent a year guarding a door, Marianne, so that nothing would change in here, so that I might keep her exactly. And the keeping was not love in the end. It was penance. I was paying her night after night for a fault that was never mine." His grey eyes came back to Marianne's face. You knew. In the passage, the first night. You said I had put the man somewhere dark and stopped feeding him and called it nothing. You were not 4 hours in my house. I am a great failing of a woman that way, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. I see the true thing, and I cannot help saying it. My father has remarked on it for years. And the ghost surfaced in him again, the dry, bleak thing that had once known how to laugh, and this time it did not sink. The hard, clean mouth moved. He undersold you, the Duke said. 5,000. It was the worst bargain your father ever drove, and I have never in my life been so glad to be cheated. It startled the breath out of her, the second time, she thought, that he had reached for wit and caught it, and the first time he had let her see him land it. She felt her own mouth curve, and did not look away from it now, and saw him watch her not look away, and something in the brown, dim room shifted on its hinge. Come out of here, he said. He held out his hand, the wide, warm hand she had felt at the altar, sliding a ring made for another woman onto her finger. This is no place to say a thing I have only this hour found I am able to say. Come out into the light. I have left her in the dark too long, and you, and Sophia, and myself. And I find I want all of us in the sun at once, and I do not very much care that I have not earned the right to ask it. She put her hand in his. They went out together through the door he had locked a year ago, and would now leave open, down the great stair into the high marble hall, and as they came, the housekeeper appeared from the passage, with her square, plain face wet, and trying hard not to be. And on the bottom step of the staircase, exactly where Marianne had first seen her, sat Lady Sophia, with the wooden horse in her lap, turning it over and over. The child looked up. Her grey eyes went from her father's face to Marianne's and back, with the unblinking directness of the very young, weighing some change in the air she had no words for. The Duke let go of Marianne's hand. He crossed the marble to where his daughter sat, and the boards of him that had not bent in a year bent now. He went down on one knee on the cold stone before her, slowly, as a great house settles, and he was on a level with the small, grave moon of her face, and his daughter's mother's eyes looked into his without flinching. Sophia, he said, and his scraped voice had gone soft, as Marianne had not believed it could. I have been a long way off, even when I was in the room. Do you know it? The child considered this with enormous seriousness. You used to make a noise, she said. I can almost remember it. It went up at the end. A laugh, the Duke said. It was a laugh, Sophie. Your mamma could fetch it out of me when no one else in England could. His throat worked. I will try to remember how. It may take a great while, and I shall do it badly at first, the way one plays an instrument one has let fall. Will you be patient with me? Sophia looked at him a long moment. Then she held out the wooden horse, balanced on both small palms, the offering Marianne had been given on the first night. His name is Captain, she said. His leg is broken, but you can't see it if you stand him this way. Marianne knows. You can know too. And the Duke of Ashbourne took the broken horse from his daughter's hands, as carefully as if it had been spun glass, and stood him on the flat of his wide palm the way she showed him, the sound leg forward, the hurt one hidden, and looked at it, and his shoulders went once, and Marianne saw the thing in him that had been a stone for a year crack clean across at last, and let the living water through. He did not weep where it could be of use to anyone. He gathered the child up off the cold step into his arms, and stood, and held her, and over the dark head, so like his own his grey eyes found Marianne, where she stood in the bar of gold light that came now full through the unshuttered window, and he did not need to say it, but he said it. Stay, he said. Not for the settlement, not for your father's book, which is paid and burned and gone. Stay because this house was a tomb, and you walked into it and opened the windows, and because my daughter says your name into the dark, and because I, the smallest crack, the last one, because I find I have been listening for your step in the passage for a week, and dread the night you do not come. That is not nothing, Marianne. You taught me the difference. It is very far from nothing. It is a beginning, Marianne said. Her eyes were stinging, and she let them. You told me on the first day there would be no courtship. I have decided to overlook it. I am new, and I do not know the rules, and I cannot be expected to. They buried nothing more that summer. They unburied. The Holland covers came off room by room, and were carried out to the wash-house in armfuls like banks of melting snow, and the long windows were thrown wide so that the warm down wind moved through the great grey beast of a house and woke it, and the withered flowers in the hall went at last onto the kitchen fire, all but one brittle stem, which Marianne pressed in a book, because some things are kept not as a shrine, but as a thank you, and she had learned by then which was which. The Duke wrote to the Earl of Marsden, and what passed between them stayed between them. But no more was ever heard of guardianship, and Lady Cordelia Vane removed to her father's distant estate, and then, before the leaves turned, to the continent and the dinner tables of Wiltshire, denied their 12 months' conversation, made do with the far stranger news that the cold Duke of Ashbourne had been seen, actually seen, by the curate's own wife, laughing on his own front steps with a child on his shoulders and a wife on his arm. The rose garden they did not prune that year. Marianne would not have it. Let them be wild and looked at, she told the head gardener, who thought her mad, rather than tidy and shut up alone. The lady who kept them tidy would understand. I think she would rather they were full of children than full of nobody. So the damask and the musk went on climbing the warm brick in their tangled magnificent arms, and Sophia ran the petal-drifted paths with a fat spaniel pup the Duke had brought home from a tenant's farm, and on the warm evenings the three of them sat out among the bees in the low gold light, and the chair beside the Duchess's place was never empty again, and the place itself was never taken, only honoured, an empty seat at a full table. The way one leaves a candle in a window, not from grief, but from love. It was high summer still, a year on from the worst of it, when Marianne woke one short pale night to a sound from down the passage, and lay and listened, and it was the pianoforte. She rose and put on her wrapper and took no candle this time, because she knew the way, and went along the gallery where the windows now stood open to the down wind, and the portrait's eyes were friendly in the moonlight, and through the inch of gap where the door had not quite caught she looked in. The Duke of Ashbourne sat at the instrument with his coat off and his shirt open at the throat, and his head was bent, and his wide warm hands moved over the keys, but not slowly now, not picking out one uncertain note at a time. He was playing the little lullaby through, whole and easy and sure, the way a man plays a thing he has made his peace with, and on the music stand where the small ivory portrait had once lain face down there, stood the portrait now upright, turned to the light, a fair grave face that had her daughter's eyes, set where it could see the room, and propped beside it, leaning companionably against the gold frame, stood a small wooden horse with a broken leg. The sound side forward, the hurt side hidden, watching over the music with its painted eye. He heard the board groan under her foot. He did not stop playing. He turned his head, and the slate-grey eyes were not wet and not furious. They were only glad, and the candleless moonlight lay along the hard, clean jaw, and the mouth that had remembered, that summer, how to laugh. "You came," he said. "I always hear the music," said Marianne, and she crossed the floor on bare silent feet and stood behind him with her hands on his warm shoulders, and looked over his bent head at the upright portrait and the broken horse keeping their watch together, and the ring upon her finger had been taken in to fit her months ago, and sat snug and true. Play it to the end. She would want to hear it finished. So should I. And he played it to the end, in the short bright summer night, with his wife's hands warm on his shoulders, and his daughter asleep down the passage, and the wild roses breathing in at the open window. And when the last note had gone out into the dark, he reached up, and laid his hand over hers. And they stayed so a while, the two of them, in the house that had learned again how to keep the light. If this story warmed you, if you sat with Marianne in the cold hall and felt the windows open one by one, stay a moment longer by the fire with us. Tell me in the comments which line you carried away, and subscribe to Adrian's Fireside, where there is always another candle lit and another door about to open. Until the next story, sleep softly and be well.